A millionaire decides to seduce a virgin woman, but he never expected her to be his boss's daughter. She refuses to be just another fling, knowing her fate is tied to loyalty and an empire of lies. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. The Manhattan skyline glittered against the evening sky as Blake Chandler adjusted his custom-tailored Armani suit. The view from the rooftop of the Wolcott Tower was breathtaking, but tonight, Blake wasn't interested in the scenery. The annual Wolcott Industries Gala was the social event of the season, and as Chief Investment Officer, Blake was expected to charm investors and secure connections that would further cement his position within the company. At 35, Blake had everything most men dreamed of: wealth, power, a penthouse overlooking Central Park, and a reputation as New York's most eligible bachelor. His meteoric rise through Wolcott Industries' ranks was legendary, from junior analyst to CIO in just 8 years. Blake was a man who took what he wanted and never apologized for it. That single-minded determination had made him a millionaire before 30 and put him in line to potentially become the next CEO of Wolcott Industries, one of the most prestigious financial firms on Wall Street. Blake, there you are. James Montgomery, head of acquisitions, approached with 2 champagne flutes. Have you met the new blood Richard brought in from Chicago? Blake accepted the champagne with a practiced smile. Not yet. Anyone worth knowing? Depends on what. How you consider worth knowing, James chuckled, nodding toward a group across the room. But I was talking about Richard's daughter. She's finally joined the company. Blake nearly choked on his champagne. Richard has a daughter since when? Since about 28 years ago, I'd imagine, James smirked. Olivia Wolcott. Been working in our Chicago office for the past few years. Word is Richard's grooming her to take over eventually. Blake's eyes narrowed as he processed this information. Richard Wolcott was not only the CEO, but the majority shareholder and founder of Wolcott Industries. In his 30 years at the helm, he'd never mentioned having a child, let alone one who was being positioned for succession. That's interesting, Blake said carefully, his gaze scanning the crowd. And she's here tonight? James nodded toward the far corner of the rooftop. By the west balcony. Blue dress. Don't say I didn't warn you. She's nothing like the women you usually pursue. Blake excused himself and made his way across the rooftop, stopping occasionally to shake hands with investors and exchange pleasantries with colleagues. All the while, his eyes remained fixed on his destination. When he finally caught sight of her, Blake felt something he hadn't experienced in years: genuine surprise. Olivia Wolcott stood apart from the crowd, observing the party with quiet intensity. Her midnight blue dress was elegant but conservative, falling just below her knees. Unlike most women at these events who draped themselves in ostentatious jewelry, she wore only simple pearl earrings and a thin gold bracelet. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a sleek updo, revealing high cheekbones and intelligent green eyes. As Blake approached, he noticed she wasn't drinking champagne like everyone else, but held a glass of sparkling water instead. She turned slightly as he drew near and their eyes met. Blake felt an unexpected jolt of electricity. "You don't look like you're enjoying the party," he said, stopping beside her. Olivia raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't aware enjoyment was mandatory." Her voice was lower than he expected, with a slight huskiness that caught him off guard. "Blake Chandler," he said, extending his hand. "Chief Investment Officer." "I know who you are, Mr. Chandler," she replied, taking his hand briefly. "Olivia Wolcott." "Ah, the mysterious daughter I've never heard about until tonight," Blake smiled, leaning against the balcony rail. "That makes 2 of us who've been keeping secrets." "I'm hardly a secret," Olivia countered. "I've been with the company for 5 years, just not in this office." Blake studied her face, trying to reconcile this woman with the larger-than-life Richard Wolcott. There was a resemblance in the sharp jawline and piercing eyes, but where Richard was bombastic and commanding, Olivia seemed contained, controlled. "And now Daddy's brought you to headquarters. Planning to follow in his footsteps?" Something flashed in her eyes. Irritation, perhaps, but her expression remained composed. I earned my position through merit, Mr. Chandler, not nepotism, though I suspect that concept might be foreign to someone who's built a career on charm and connections. Blake laughed, genuinely amused by her directness. Most people either feared or fawned over him, but Olivia Wolcott did neither. Touché. Though you might want to check your sources, I climbed my way up from nothing. No wealthy family or Ivy. League connections to smooth my path. Is that supposed to impress me? Olivia asked, but there was less edge to her tone now, more curiosity. No, Blake replied, honestly. But it might help you understand me better. Their conversation was interrupted as Richard Wolcott himself appeared, clapping Blake on the shoulder with one hand and putting his other arm around his daughter. I see you've met my pride. Enjoy, Richard boomed, his face flushed with pride and perhaps a bit too much scotch. At 62, Richard remained an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair and the commanding presence of someone accustomed to power. Just now, Blake replied smoothly, you've been holding out on us, Richard. Never mentioned. Your daughter was so, accomplished. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly, but his smile remained fixed. Olivia's the future of this company, Blake. She'll be working directly with the executive team starting Monday. I expect you to show her the ropes. Blake caught the subtle warning in Richard's tone. The CEO might be fond of Blake professionally, but the protective glint in his eye made one thing clear. Olivia was off limits. It would be my pleasure, Blake replied, raising his glass in a toast. After Richard moved on to greet other guests, Olivia turned to Blake with a knowing look. You don't have to babysit me, Mr. Chandler. I'm perfectly capable of finding my own way. Blake, he corrected, and I have no doubt about your capabilities, Olivia. But your father's request gives me the perfect excuse to see more of you, so I'm not about to refuse. She studied him for a long moment. You're exactly as they described you. And how's that? Arrogant, calculated, relentlessly ambitious. She paused. And dangerous. Blake moved closer, close enough to catch the subtle scent of her perfume. Something clean and floral, not the heavy, seductive fragrances he was accustomed to. Dangerous, he repeated softly. That's a strong word. Appropriate, nonetheless, Olivia replied, not backing away despite their proximity. You're the kind of man who sees what he wants and takes it, regardless of consequences or collateral damage. Blake smiled slowly. You say that, like it's a bad thing. It is when what you want isn't yours to take. There it was. The challenge. In her eyes, the slight tilt of her chin that betrayed a stubborn streak beneath the polished exterior. Something shifted inside Blake, a feeling he couldn't immediately identify. This wasn't just attraction. It was something more primal, more compelling. Everything is mine to take, Blake said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, if I want it badly enough. Olivia held his gaze, unflinching. Then it's fortunate for both of us that I'm not on your acquisition list. With that, she stepped away, preparing to rejoin the party. Blake reached for her wrist, stopping her with a gentle but firm touch. What makes you so sure about that? He asked. For the briefest moment, something flickered across Olivia's face. Uncertainty, perhaps, or an answering spark of interest she quickly suppressed. Because, Mr. Chandler, she said, deliberately using his formal name again, I'm not interested in becoming another conquest in your portfolio, and more importantly, my father would destroy you if you tried. Blake released her wrist but stepped closer. That sounds like a challenge rather than a deterrent. It's a warning, Olivia corrected, but the slight catch in her breath betrayed her. For both our sakes, heed it. As she walked away, Blake watched her disappear into the crowd, his mind already racing with possibilities. For the first time in years, he felt genuinely intrigued. Olivia Wolcott wasn't just any woman. She was forbidden territory, the daughter, of the man who controlled his professional destiny. And yet, as Blake finished his champagne and turned back to the glittering Manhattan skyline, he knew with absolute certainty he wanted her. Not just physically, though that desire was undeniable, but completely. He wanted to unravel the mystery behind those guarded green eyes, to discover what lay beneath her carefully controlled exterior. "I want your first time and every time after," he murmured to himself, the declaration quiet but resolute against the backdrop of the party's chatter. Blake Chandler always got what he wanted. And now he wanted Olivia Wolcott, regardless of the consequences. Monday morning arrived with the characteristic hustle of New York City's financial district. Blake Chandler strode through the gleaming lobby of Wolcott Tower, nodding at security, guards who had long since memorized his face. The 60-story glass and steel monolith housed Wolcott Industries' global headquarters, and as Blake stepped into the executive elevator, he felt the familiar surge of satisfaction that came with belonging at the top. His corner office on the 58th floor offered panoramic views of Manhattan, but today, Blake's attention was fixed on the conference room across the hall, where Richard Wolcott was introducing his daughter to the executive team. Through the glass walls, Blake could see Olivia standing beside her father, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that managed to be professional without concealing her femininity. "Mr. Chandler?" His assistant, Melissa, appeared at his door. Mr. Wolcott asked if you could join them. Blake straightened his tie. Perfect timing. As Blake entered the conference room, all eyes turned to him, all except Olivia's. She kept her gaze fixed on the presentation displayed on the wall screen, deliberately ignoring his arrival. "Blake," Richard called out, "just in time. I was telling everyone how you'll be showing Olivia our investment strategies for the Richardson merger." Blake took the empty seat directly across from Olivia. "Happy to help in any way I can." "Olivia will be heading up our new sustainable investment division," Richard continued. "Her work in Chicago revolutionized how we approach environmental and social governance factors in our portfolios." Blake raised an eyebrow. ESG investments were notoriously difficult to monetize effectively, often sacrificing profit for principle. That Richard was creating an entire division around the concept and putting his daughter in charge spoke volumes about both his faith in her and his vision for the company's future. "Impressive," Blake commented, finally catching Olivia's eye. "Though I'm curious how you plan to maintain our profit margins while pursuing sustainability goals. Those two objectives aren't always compatible." A hint of a smile played at Olivia's lips. "That's only true if you're thinking in quarterly terms, Mr. Chandler. Over a longer horizon, sustainable investments actually outperform traditional models by an average of 12%. Theory and practice often tell different stories," Blake countered, enjoying the spark of challenge in her eyes. "Which is why I've prepared case studies from our Chicago office," Olivia replied smoothly, sliding tablets across the table to each executive. "The numbers speak for themselves." As the meeting progressed, Blake found himself increasingly impressed by Olivia's presentation. She wasn't just knowledgeable, she was innovative, presenting strategies that balanced profitability with principles in ways he hadn't considered. When she fielded questions from the executive team, some of them deliberately pointed and skeptical, she responded with confidence and clarity. By the meeting's end, even Blake had to admit she'd won over the room. As executives filtered out, Richard clapped his hands together once. "Blake, I'd like you to give Olivia a tour of the trading floor and introduce her to the team leads. I've got a call with Tokyo in 10 minutes. "Of course," Blake agreed readily, watching Richard kiss his daughter's cheek before departing. When they were alone, Olivia turned to gather her materials. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Chandler. I'm perfectly capable of finding my way around." "Back to Mr. Chandler, are we?" Blake moved to help her, deliberately stepping into her personal space. "And here, I thought we made progress at the gala." Olivia stepped back, creating distance between them. "The gala was a social event. This is business." "Is that how you compartmentalize your life? Business in one box, pleasure in another?" "Some of us believe in maintaining professional boundaries," she replied coolly. Blake leaned against the conference table, studying her. In daylight, without the soft lighting of the gala, Olivia was even more striking. Her eyes were a more complex green than he'd initially thought, flecked with gold near the pupils, and a light dusting of freckles crossed the bridge of her nose, somehow both girlish and alluring. "Professional boundaries are important," Blake conceded. But so is understanding that we're not just job titles and revenue projections. We're people, Olivia, complex, contradictory, and occasionally irrational people. Something in his tone made her pause. She met his gaze directly for the first time that morning. Is that how you justify your reputation, by claiming irrationality? Blake laughed. What exactly have you heard about me? Olivia hesitated, then seemed to decide honesty was the best approach. That you're brilliant but ruthless, that you've never met a deal or a woman you couldn't conquer if you set your mind to it, and that anyone who stands between you and what you want eventually regrets it. You've been doing your homework, Blake observed, not bothering to deny the characterization. But you've missed something important. And what's that? I don't pursue what doesn't interest me, Blake said simply. Life's too short to waste on mediocrity, in business or in pleasure. The implication hung in the air between them. Olivia broke eye contact first, gathering the last of her materials. The trading. Floor, she prompted, all business again. This way. Blake gestured toward the door, resisting the urge to place his hand on the small of her back as they walked. The trading floor was a hive of controlled chaos, analysts hunched over multiple screens, traders barking orders into headsets, the constant ticker of financial data scrolling across wall-mounted displays. As Blake introduced Olivia to key team members, he noticed how quickly she absorbed information, asking insightful questions that revealed her deep understanding of market mechanics. I'm impressed, he admitted, as they made their way back to the executive floor. Most people need weeks to grasp what you've picked up in an hour. I've been preparing for this my entire life, Olivia replied, her guard lowering slightly. My father started teaching me about markets when I was 12. By 16, I was managing my own portfolio. And yet he kept you hidden away in Chicago. All these years, Blake observed. Why now? Something complicated flickered across Olivia's face. That was my choice, not his. I wanted to establish myself without his shadow looming over every achievement. And now? Now it's time for the next phase, she said simply. They reached her new office, not as large as Blake's, but with equally impressive views and positioned diagonally across from his own. As she unlocked the door, Blake made a decision. Have dinner with me tonight, he said, the words somewhere between a question and a command. Olivia turned, surprise evident in her expression. That would be inappropriate. Why, we're colleagues, not subordinate and superior. There's no conflict of interest. Except that my father is your boss, Olivia pointed out, and you know perfectly well that dinner isn't what you're really proposing. Blake stepped closer, close enough to see the slight acceleration of her pulse at the base of her throat. What am I proposing, then? A complication neither of us needs, she replied, but made no move to increase the distance between them. Sometimes complications are exactly what we need, Blake countered softly. Sometimes they're the only things worth pursuing. For a moment, something shifted in Olivia's expression, a crack in her composure that revealed uncertainty, curiosity, and yes, desire. But then her phone chimed with a message, breaking the tension between them. Glancing at the screen, her expression changed. I need to take this. Blake nodded, stepping back. Think about dinner. We can call it a business meeting if that makes it easier for you to say yes. Leaving her to her call, Blake returned to his office, mind already racing with strategies. The challenge Olivia presented was unlike any he'd faced before, not just because of who her father was, but because of who she was. Intelligent, principled, guarded, everything about her intrigued him. Later that afternoon, Blake was reviewing quarterly projections when a knock at his door interrupted him. Expecting Melissa, he called out a distracted, "Come in," without looking up from his screen. You still owe me that tour, Olivia said from the doorway. Blake looked up, surprise quickly giving way to pleasure. I thought you were perfectly capable of finding your way around. I am, she acknowledged with the hint of a smile. But my father insisted I take advantage of your expertise. Blake saved his work and stood. Far be it from me to disappoint Richard Woolcott. As they walked through the executive floor, Blake pointed out various departments and key personnel, but his attention was primarily on Olivia, the subtle floral scent of her perfume, the graceful way she moved, the occasional brush of her shoulder against his arm when they passed through narrow corridors. "And what's down there?" Olivia asked, nodding toward a hallway Blake had deliberately skipped. "Archives," Blake replied. "Nothing interesting unless you enjoy dust and paper cuts." Olivia checked her watch. "Show me anyway. I want to understand everything about how this company operates." The archives were housed in a converted storage area, rows of filing cabinets, and shelves filled with boxes of documents too sensitive or legally significant to exist solely in digital form. As the door swung shut behind them, the sounds of the office faded, replaced by a hushed quiet broken only by the hum of climate control systems. "Why are you really here, Olivia?" Blake asked as they moved between rows of cabinets. She traced her fingers along a shelf edge, not looking at him. "I told you to learn the business." "You already know the business," Blake countered. "You've been working for your father for years. There's something else bringing you to New York, to headquarters, something you're not saying." Olivia stopped, walking her back to him. For a long moment she said nothing, and Blake wondered if he'd pushed too far. Then she turned, and the vulnerability in her expression caught him off guard. "My father isn't well," she said quietly. "Heart problems. He doesn't want anyone to know. It would shake investor confidence. But he needs to start transitioning responsibilities." Blake absorbed this information, immediately understanding its implications. Richard Wolcott wasn't just the CEO, he was the living embodiment of Wolcott Industries. His health issues would indeed rattle the markets if made public. "I'm sorry," Blake said, genuinely meaning it. "Is there anything I can do?" Olivia shook her head. "Just don't mention it to anyone, not even to him. He's private about his health." "Of course," Blake agreed, then added, "but that doesn't explain why you're telling me." Olivia met his gaze directly. "Because despite your reputation and everything I've been warned about you, my instincts say you can be trusted when it matters. Was I wrong?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications beyond the immediate context. Blake moved closer, drawn by something in her eyes. "No," he said softly, "you weren't wrong." The air between them seemed to charge with electricity, and Blake found himself acutely aware of their isolation, the privacy the archives afforded them. Olivia must have sensed it too, because she took a half-step back, only to find herself against a filing cabinet. "We should get back," she murmured, but made no move to leave. "We should," Blake agreed, closing the distance between them. Time seemed to slow as he raised his hand to her face, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, he traced the line of her jaw with his thumb, feeling her pulse quicken beneath his touch. "This is a mistake," Olivia whispered, even as she leaned almost imperceptibly into his hand. "Probably," Blake acknowledged, his voice low. "But not all mistakes are regrets." Her lips parted slightly, and Blake knew if he kissed her now, there would be no turning back. The warning in her eyes struggled against the desire he could feel in the slight tremor of her body. Just as he began to lower his head toward hers, the harsh buzz of the archive door's electronic lock shattered the moment. They sprang apart. As a company archivist entered, nodding politely to Blake before disappearing down a row of shelves, the interruption had broken whatever spell had been weaving itself around them. "I should go," Olivia said, smoothing her jacket with hands that weren't quite steady. "I have a meeting with the legal team at 3. Blake nodded, frustrated by the interruption but also aware they'd been teetering on a dangerous edge. "About dinner?" "I'll think about it," Olivia promised, then added with a ghost of a smile, "but I wouldn't wait by the phone." As she left the archives, Blake watched her go, desire and determination crystallizing into a single thought. Olivia. Wolcott was unlike any woman he'd ever pursued, and that made her all the more worth the chase. 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of meetings, presentations, and strategies. Blake found himself simultaneously frustrated and fascinated by Olivia's ability to maintain professional distance, while still sending signals that suggested she wasn't as immune to him as she pretended to be. Small moments, a lingering glance across the conference table, the brush of her fingers against his when passing documents, the way she sometimes laughed at his quiet asides during tedious meetings, all hinted at something simmering beneath her composed exterior. She had declined his dinner invitation, as expected, but countered with a proposal of her own. A working lunch in the company dining room to discuss the Richardson merger. Public, professional, and precisely the kind of compromise that revealed her strategic mind. Today, Blake was reviewing the final acquisition documents for a small tech company Wolcott Industries was absorbing when his phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at Bryant Park, Bethesda Fountain, 7 p.m. Come alone. It's about Wolcott." Blake stared at the message, considering its implications. Anonymous texts rarely brought good news, especially ones mentioning his boss by name. Still, curiosity won out. Responding with a simple, "Who is this?" yielded nothing but silence. After a moment's deliberation, Blake tucked his phone away and returned to the acquisition papers, though his focus was compromised. At 10 minutes to 7, Blake found himself approaching Bethesda Fountain in the heart of Bryant Park. The late spring evening was pleasant, the park filled with New Yorkers enjoying the weather after a day of work. Blake had loosened his tie and removed his suit jacket, allowing him to blend more easily with the casual crowd, though his Italian leather shoes and tailored shirt still marked him as someone from the financial district. He scanned the area around the fountain, looking for anyone who might be waiting specifically for him. Nothing stood out until he spotted a familiar face that didn't belong: Carter Davis, former VP of Operations at Wolcott Industries. Carter had been quietly dismissed 6 months ago, ostensibly for pursuing other opportunities, but rumors suggested he'd fallen out of favor with Richard after questioning some financial discrepancies. Blake approached casually, as if their meeting were coincidental. "Carter, didn't expect to see you here." Carter looked up, tension evident in his posture. Once an impeccably groomed executive, he now sported several days of stubble and visible fatigue around his eyes. "Thanks for coming, Blake. I wasn't sure you would." "Your message was intriguing," Blake said, sitting beside him on the fountain's edge. "What's this about?" Carter glanced around before speaking, his voice low. "I've been doing some digging since I left Wolcott. Things didn't add up about my dismissal. Richard claimed I mishandled the Singapore project, but that was just a cover." Blake maintained a neutral expression. "That's a serious accusation." "It gets worse," Carter continued, pulling a thumb drive from his pocket. "I found evidence of financial manipulation, massive contracts being rewritten after signing, funds being diverted through shell companies, regulatory reports being falsified. Richard's been running a sophisticated scheme for years." Blake eyed the thumb drive but didn't reach for it. "If you're suggesting what I think you are, you're talking about securities fraud. That's a serious allegation against one of the most respected names in finance." "I know how it sounds," Carter sighed. "But it's all here, documented, verified. Richard terminated me because I stumbled onto one of the shell companies by accident. He paid me off handsomely to stay quiet, but—" He trailed off, looking troubled. "But your conscience got the better of you," Blake suggested. Carter's laugh was hollow. "Conscience, self-preservation, call it what you will. If this ever comes to light, anyone associated with those transactions could face charges, including you, Blake." A cold sensation settled in Blake's stomach. "I've never authorized anything illegal." "Maybe not knowingly," Carter countered, "but your signature is on at least 3 deals I found that were later modified. The Richardson merger, for one." Blake's mind raced. The Richardson merger was the deal he and Olivia had been collaborating on for the past 2 weeks. If what Carter was saying was true, why come to me with this? Why not the SEC or the FBI? Carter's expression darkened. "Because I'm not naive. Richard Wolcott has judges and politicians in his pocket. A whistleblower like me would be discredited before I could finish filing the paperwork. I need someone on the inside, someone with credibility and access." "And you think that's me?" Blake asked incredulously. "I'm Richard's protégé. He's been grooming me for years." "Exactly," Carter nodded. "He trusts you, but more importantly, you're ambitious enough to see the writing on the wall. Richard's time is ending, Blake. His health isn't what it used to be." Blake carefully masked his surprise at this confirmation of what Olivia had told him. "So what exactly are you proposing?" "Take this." Carter pressed the thumb drive into Blake's hand. "Review the evidence. Verify it independently if you don't trust me. Then make your move before Richard throws you under the bus, which he will eventually. Everyone is expendable to him. Blake pocketed the drive, his mind already analyzing angles and implications. And what do you get out of this? Carter stood, preparing to leave. Let's call it a mutual insurance policy. If this blows up, we both need someone else who knows the truth. He paused, then added, one more thing. Richard's daughter, she's not just here for succession planning. She's been investigating too, trying to clean up her father's mess before it destroys the company she's set to inherit. Be careful around her, Blake. She's smarter than most give her credit for. With that cryptic warning, Carter melted into the crowd, leaving Blake alone with a thumb drive that potentially contained career-ending, perhaps even freedom-ending information about his mentor and boss. The following morning, Blake arrived at his office earlier than usual, having spent most of the night reviewing the contents of Carter's thumb drive. The evidence was methodically organized and damning. If authentic, it revealed a sophisticated fraud spanning years, with Richard Wolcott at its center. Most disturbing were the documents showing how the Richardson merger, supposedly Blake's, crowning achievement, had been manipulated after his initial work, with clauses added that effectively siphoned assets into offshore accounts. As Blake sipped his coffee and watched the sun rise over Manhattan, his door opened without a knock. Olivia Wolcott stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "We need to talk," she said simply, closing the door behind her and engaging the privacy lock. Blake gestured to the chair across from his desk, hiding his surprise at her early appearance. "About what?" Instead of sitting, Olivia moved to the window, her reflection ghostly against the brightening sky. "Carter Davis contacted you, didn't he?" Blake carefully set down his coffee, buying time to consider his response. "What makes you think that?" Olivia turned to face him, her eyes searching his. "Because he contacted me 2 months ago with the same information. That's why I'm here in New York, Blake. Not because of my father's health, though that's part of it, but because I've been trying to verify what Carter found." "And have you?" Blake asked, his voice neutral. "Enough to know we're sitting on a time bomb," Olivia replied. "My father has been manipulating contracts, hiding assets, and falsifying regulatory reports for at least 5 years. The question is, what do we do about it?" Blake studied her, looking for any sign of deception, but finding only the same intensity and principle he'd observed since their first meeting. Most daughters would protect their fathers. Most fathers wouldn't put their daughters in this position. Olivia countered sharply, then softened. "I love my father, Blake, but what he's done is it could destroy everything he built, everything I've worked for, everything you've worked for." Blake stood, moving around his desk to stand before her. "Why are you telling me this? How do you know I'm not complicit?" "Because I've been watching you," Olivia admitted, "reviewing every deal you've overseen, every contract you've negotiated. You're ambitious, sometimes ruthless, but you've never crossed legal lines. Your work is clean, Blake. That's why Carter came to you too. He knew we'd both need allies." Something shifted in Blake's perception of her. The wariness in her eyes, the guardedness he'd attributed to professional boundaries, or their personal tension, suddenly made perfect sense. Olivia had been carrying this burden alone, investigating her own father while navigating a new position and the complex dynamics of their attraction. "What's your plan?" Blake asked, not confirming or denying that Carter had approached him. Olivia hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "I've been gathering evidence, building a case to present to the board. If we can contain this internally, restructure the problematic deals, and implement stricter oversight, we might avoid public scandal and criminal charges." "And your father?" Pain flashed across her face. "He'd have to step down, retire due to health concerns. It's the only way to protect the company and the thousands of people who work for it." Blake absorbed this, impressed by her pragmatism despite the personal cost. "That's a massive undertaking. The board won't easily turn against Richard regardless of evidence." "I know," Olivia acknowledged. "That's why I need your help, your influence with the board members, your understanding of the deals in question. We need to work together, Blake." The request hung between them, weighted with implications beyond the professional realm. Working together would mean long hours, shared secrets, and intimacy forged through crisis. Blake knew it would only intensify whatever was developing between them. "What makes you think you can trust me?" Blake asked softly, stepping closer. "For all you know, I could take this information straight to your father." Olivia didn't back away, meeting his gaze steadily. "Because despite your ruthless reputation, you've built your career on merit and intelligence, not deceit. And because when it matters, I believe you do the right thing." Her faith in him was both exhilarating and unsettling. For years, Blake had pursued success with single-minded determination, viewing people as either assets or obstacles. But Olivia defied such simple categorization. She wasn't just Richard's daughter or a potential conquest. She was a woman of principle, willing to risk everything to do what was right. "I'm in," Blake said finally, "but we do this my way, carefully, methodically, with backup plans for every contingency." Relief flickered across Olivia's face before she composed herself again. "Thank you. I was hoping you'd say that." "Don't thank me yet," Blake warned. "This is going to get ugly before it gets better. Are you prepared for the possibility that your father might never forgive you?" Olivia's gaze dropped momentarily, revealing the emotional toll this was taking. "I've been struggling with that since I found the first discrepancy. But the alternative is watching him destroy himself and everything he built. I can't stand by and let that happen." Blake reached out, touching her arm lightly. "I don't have to do this alone anymore." The moment stretched between them, charged with something beyond professional alliance. Then Olivia stepped back, her expression shifting to determination. "We should start with the Richardson documents. My father's planning to finalize the merger next week." For the next several days, Blake and Olivia worked in secret, meeting after hours in his apartment to avoid office surveillance. They meticulously documented the evidence, building a comprehensive case that would be impossible for the board to ignore. Working in such close proximity, the professional boundaries Olivia had insisted upon began to blur. On Friday evening, they were reviewing financial statements at Blake's penthouse when Olivia discovered a particularly damning transaction. "Look at this," she said, passing her tablet to Blake. $3 million moved through 7 different shell companies before landing in an account in the Cayman Islands. The paperwork makes it look like legitimate consulting fees, but there's no evidence any consulting ever happened. Blake examined the transaction, whistling low. "This is beyond what Carter showed me. Your father's been running this scheme longer than I thought." "How could he do this?" Olivia's voice cracked slightly. "He taught me ethics in business. I used to say that our reputation was worth more than any profit margin." Blake set aside the tablet and moved to the kitchen counter where he poured 2 glasses of bourbon. People change. Principles erode under pressure. One small compromise leads to another, then another, until you're so far over the line you can't even see it anymore. He handed Olivia a glass, their fingers brushing. "The question is, what changed for him? When did it start?" Olivia accepted the drink but didn't immediately sip it. "From what I can piece together, around 5 years ago, right after my mother died." Blake hadn't known this detail about her personal life. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize." "Cancer," Olivia said simply. "It was quick, at least. But it broke something in him. He became more withdrawn, more ruthless in business. I thought it was just grief. But looking back, that's when the ethical compromises began." Blake moved closer, drawn by the vulnerability she rarely displayed. Grief can distort someone's moral compass, make them desperate for control when they've lost what matters most. "That doesn't excuse what he did," Olivia insisted, finally taking a sip of bourbon. "No," Blake agreed, "but it might explain it." They were standing close now, the documents momentarily forgotten. In the soft lighting of his apartment, with the Manhattan skyline glittering through floor-to-ceiling windows, Olivia looked both stronger and more vulnerable than she had in any of their office encounters. "Why did you really pursue me, Blake?" she asked suddenly. "Was it just because I was forbidden or because I was Richard's daughter?" The directness of her question caught him off guard. For once, Blake didn't calculate his response. At first, perhaps, he admitted. You were a challenge, something new in a world where I was becoming bored with easy victories, but now... He hesitated, searching for words that wouldn't come easily to someone unaccustomed to emotional honesty. Now? Olivia prompted softly. Blake set down his glass and reached for her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. Now I find myself thinking about you constantly, not as a conquest or a challenge, but as the most fascinating, principled, complex woman I've ever met. Olivia didn't pull away from his touch, but uncertainty flickered in her eyes. We're playing a dangerous game, Blake. If we get too close, we risk compromising everything we're working toward. Maybe, Blake acknowledged, moving closer still. Or maybe we're stronger together than apart. The tension between them had been building for weeks, and in this moment something finally broke. Olivia set aside her glass and stepped into him, her hand sliding to the back of his neck, as their lips met in a kiss that was both tender and urgent. Blake pulled her closer, one hand at the small of her back, the other tangled in her hair. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Olivia's eyes were wide with conflicting emotions. I shouldn't have done that, she whispered, but made no move to step away from his embrace. We both know this has been inevitable since the night we met, Blake replied, his voice rough with desire. The only question is what happens next. Olivia's phone chimed with an incoming message before she could respond. Reluctantly extracting herself from Blake's arms, she checked the screen, her expression immediately shifting to alarm. It's my father? He wants to see me immediately at his house in Connecticut, says it's urgent. Blake's instincts sharpened. That's unusual for a Friday night. Do you think he knows? I don't see how he could, Olivia frowned, already gathering her things, but I can't ignore the summons without raising suspicion. Blake caught her arm. I don't like this. Let me come with you. That would definitely raise suspicion, Olivia countered. I need to handle this alone. Besides, we should avoid being seen together outside of work until we're ready to present our case to the board. At least let me drive you, Blake insisted. We can continue discussing strategy on the way, and I'll drop you at the property gate. Olivia hesitated, then relented. Fine, but stay out of sight. My father has security cameras everywhere. The drive to Richard Woolcott's estate in Greenwich took just over an hour. As Blake steered his Aston Martin through the winding roads of Connecticut, Olivia grew increasingly quiet, her tension palpable. Whatever happens, Blake said as they approached the ornate gates of the Woolcott estate, remember that you're doing the right thing. For the company, for the employees, and ultimately for your father, too. Olivia nodded but didn't quite meet his eyes. I'll call you when I'm done. Blake watched her walk through the gates, a sense of foreboding settling over him. Instead of leaving as promised, he parked a discreet distance down the road and waited, unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong. Inside the mansion, Olivia found her father in his study, standing at the window overlooking the manicured gardens. Even from behind, she could see that his once powerful frame had diminished slightly, his shoulders not quite as broad as she remembered. You wanted to see me, she said, announcing her presence. Richard turned, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Olivia, thank you for coming on such short notice. You said it was urgent, she replied, careful to keep her tone neutral. Richard gestured to the leather chair across from his desk. As Olivia sat, he remained standing, studying, her with an intensity that made her uneasy. I received an interesting call today, he said finally, from an old colleague who thought I should know that my daughter has been meeting privately with Blake Chandler at his apartment. Olivia's heart raced, but she kept her expression carefully composed. Blake and I have been working on the Richardson merger. Sometimes that requires after-hours collaboration. Richard's laugh held no humor. Please don't insult my intelligence, Olivia. I know exactly what you and Blake have been collaborating on. He reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a familiar thumb drive. Carter Davis might be intelligent, but he's sloppy. Did you really think I wouldn't have monitoring software on all company devices? Ice flooded Olivia's veins. You've been spying on us. I've been protecting what's mine, Richard corrected, his voice hardening. The company, my reputation, and yes, even you. Blake Chandler is using you, Olivia. He sees you as his ticket to the CEO's chair once I'm gone. That's not true, Olivia countered, though doubt crept into her mind. And it doesn't change what we found. The fraudulent contracts, the shell companies, the falsified reports. Necessary adjustments, Richard interrupted dismissively. The financial world runs on flexible interpretations of regulations, Olivia. Everyone does it. I'm just better at it than most. What you're doing is illegal, Olivia insisted, standing now. It could bring down the entire company. Everything you've built, everything you claim to be protecting, gone. Richard's expression darkened. I didn't spend 30 years building this empire to have it torn down by my own daughter and an ambitious underling. You have a choice to make, Olivia. Stand with your family or stand against me. But know this, if you choose wrong, there will be consequences neither you nor Blake are prepared for. The threat hung in the air between them, and for the first time Olivia felt truly afraid of her father. Not for herself, but for what he might be capable of in his determination to protect his secrets. What are you planning to do? She asked, carefully. Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. Insurance, my dear. A fail-safe I've long had in place for situations exactly like this. By this time tomorrow, if I don't input a specific code into a secure server, evidence will automatically be sent to the authorities implicating Blake in all of the activities you've been so diligently documenting. His signature is on enough of those documents to build a convincing case. You're bluffing, Olivia said, but uncertainty colored her voice. Am I? Richard challenged. Are you willing to gamble with Blake's freedom to find out? Because I assure you, my dear, I am not bluffing. Blake goes to prison. The company survives with a slap on the wrist due to my connections, and you learn a valuable lesson about loyalty. Olivia felt the walls closing in around her. She'd known confronting her father would be difficult, but she'd never imagined he would resort to such tactics, threatening to sacrifice Blake to save himself. You have until noon tomorrow to decide, Richard continued. Either you destroy all evidence you've gathered and swear to never speak of this again, or Blake Chandler's career and freedom are finished. As Olivia left the mansion, her mind raced with impossible choices. Her father had called her bluff and raised the stakes beyond anything she'd anticipated. Now she had to decide, protect the man she was falling for, or expose the truth regardless of the cost. Blake knew something was wrong the moment Olivia slid into the passenger seat of his Aston Martin. Her face was pale, her eyes distant, and her hands trembled slightly as she fastened her seatbelt. Drive, she said simply. Anywhere but here. Blake pulled away from the Woolcott estate, concern mounting as Olivia remained silent, staring out at the darkened Connecticut landscape. Finally, when they were miles from her father's property, he pulled into a deserted scenic overlook and turned off the engine. What happened? He asked, turning to face her. Olivia drew a shaky breath. He knows everything. About us, about the investigation, about Carter. All of it. Blake absorbed this news with outward calm, though his mind was already calculating scenarios and contingencies. How? Monitoring software on company devices, Olivia explained. And apparently someone saw us together at your apartment and reported back to him. Blake cursed softly. I should have been more careful. What did he say? Olivia turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. He threatened you, Blake. He has some kind of fail-safe, evidence implicating you in all the fraudulent transactions. If we don't back down by noon tomorrow, he'll trigger its release to the authorities. A bluff? Blake said immediately, but uncertainty crept into his voice. Is it? Olivia challenged. Your signature is on enough documents to make a convincing case. Even if you eventually proved your innocence, the damage would be done. Your reputation, your career, possibly even your freedom, all gone. Blake reached for her hand, finding it cold to the touch. And what does he want in return for not triggering this failsafe? Complete surrender, Olivia replied bitterly. Destroy all evidence, never speak of it again, and presumably continue working for him as if nothing happened. Blake was quiet for a long moment, processing everything. He's desperate. That means we're closer to exposing him than I thought. Didn't you hear me? Olivia's voice rose. He's going to destroy you if we don't back down. Let him try, Blake replied, a dangerous edge entering his voice. Your father isn't the only one with contingency plans. I've been playing this game a long time, Olivia. She studied his face in the dim light. What aren't you telling me? Blake hesitated, then made a decision. After Carter approached me, I began making my own arrangements. I couldn't be sure the evidence was authentic or that you weren't somehow involved in your father's schemes, so I quietly secured my own position. How? Olivia asked warily. I created my own insurance policy, documentation proving I had no knowledge of the fraudulent modifications to the contracts I signed, time-stamped digital records showing when changes were made and by whom, records that clearly implicate your father and his inner circle, but exonerate me. Olivia's eyes widened. You've been investigating independently this whole time, even while working with me? Initially, yes, Blake admitted, until I was certain of your position. And now? The question contained layers of meaning beyond the immediate crisis. Blake's gaze softened. Now I trust you completely, which is why I'm telling you this. We don't have to back down. We can still expose your father's actions and protect ourselves. How? Olivia asked, hope cautiously returning to her voice. By being more ruthless than Richard thinks we can be, Blake said, his tone resolute. He believes you'll capitulate to save me because of your feelings. He's counting on your moral principles and emotional attachments to give him leverage. And he's right, Olivia admitted quietly. I won't sacrifice you to expose him, I can't. Blake brought her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. You won't have to. But we need to move quickly, and we need to change tactics. No more gathering. Evidence in secret. It's time to go on the offensive. As they drove back to Manhattan, Blake outlined his plan. By midnight, they had set it in motion, working from a secure location outside Blake's potentially compromised apartment. By dawn, they had contacted key board members, with carefully worded messages requesting an emergency meeting. By 10 a.m., they were walking into Woolcott Tower together, presenting a united front. Richard Woolcott was waiting for them in the boardroom, his expression thunderous as they entered. 6 of the 9 board members were already seated around the massive table, confusion and concern evident on their faces. What is the meaning of this? Richard demanded, his gaze fixed on Olivia. I thought we had an understanding. We do, Olivia replied calmly. I understand exactly who you are now, Father, and so will everyone else. Before Richard could respond, Blake addressed the board. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. We've called this emergency meeting because Woolcott Industries is facing an existential threat, one that requires immediate action. What threat? Marjorie Whitman, the most senior board member, inquired sharply. Blake nodded to Olivia, who distributed sealed folders to each board member. The evidence in front of you documents a systematic pattern of fraud that has been ongoing for approximately 5 years. Contract manipulation, falsified regulatory filings, shell companies used to divert funds, all of it orchestrated by Richard Woolcott. The room erupted in shocked murmurs as the board members began reviewing the documents. Richard's face flushed with rage. This is absurd, he sputtered. A desperate ploy by an ambitious executive and my misguided daughter. None of this will stand up to scrutiny. Actually, it will, Blake countered smoothly. Every document has been authenticated by 2 independent forensic accounting firms. The trail of evidence is comprehensive and incontrovertible. Richard's eyes narrowed dangerously. You seem to have forgotten our conversation, Olivia. Perhaps you need a reminder of what's at stake. He reached for his phone, but Olivia was faster, sliding a document across the table toward him. Are you looking for this? She asked, as Richard stared at what appeared to be a printout of computer code. Your fail-safe has been neutralized. The server hosting your insurance policy was located and secured 3 hours ago. Blake watched a range of emotions cross Richard's face, shock, rage, and finally the beginning of fear. Impossible, Richard whispered. Not for someone with the right skills, Blake remarked. You're not the only one with connections, Richard. Richard's gaze darted between them, calculation replacing shock. You have no idea what you're doing. This company will collapse if this becomes public. Thousands of jobs lost, billions in shareholder value destroyed, all because you two couldn't look the other way. That's where you're wrong, Olivia interjected. We've developed a comprehensive restructuring plan that addresses the fraudulent transactions while preserving the company's core operations. It will require significant leadership changes and transparent cooperation with regulators. But Woolcott Industries can survive this, even thrive eventually. As she spoke, Blake distributed a second set of documents outlining their proposed restructuring strategy. The board members, still reeling from the initial revelations, began reviewing these new materials with increasing interest. "This is quite thorough," Marjorie Whitman observed, looking up at Olivia with new respect. "You've anticipated the regulatory challenges admirably." "It's the only way forward," Olivia affirmed, "but it requires immediate action and complete transparency." Richard Woolcott had gone very still, his legendary composure finally cracking. "So this is your play," he said quietly, looking at Blake with cold fury. "Use my daughter to stage a coup, take my company. Did you promise her the CEO position while you pull the strings from behind the throne?" "This isn't about taking your company," Blake replied evenly. "It's about saving it from your actions. As for leadership, that's for the board to decide." "And what about loyalty?" Richard demanded, turning to his daughter. "What about family?" Olivia held her father's gaze, unwavering despite the pain evident in her eyes. "You taught me that principle should never be compromised, that integrity was the foundation of everything we do. You were right, Father. That's why I can't stand by while you destroy everything you built." For a moment, something vulnerable flashed across Richard's face, regret perhaps, or a glimpse of the man he had been before grief and power warped his moral compass. Then his expression hardened again. "You'll regret this," he said, rising from his chair. "Both of you." "Sit down, Richard," Marjorie commanded, her authority as lead director suddenly apparent. "This meeting is not concluded." What followed was 6 hours of grueling discussion as the board reviewed the evidence, questioned Blake and Olivia extensively, and deliberated on next steps. By late afternoon, they had reached a consensus. Richard Woolcott would be removed as CEO, effective immediately. The company would self-report to regulatory authorities with a remediation plan already in progress. A special committee would be formed to oversee the restructuring, with Olivia appointed as interim CEO during the transition. As the boardroom finally emptied, leaving only Blake and Olivia, the weight of the day's events settled over them. They had won, but the victory felt hollow against the personal cost, particularly for Olivia, who had been forced to choose between principles and family. "Are you okay?" Blake asked softly, moving to stand beside her at the window overlooking the city. Olivia's reflection in the glass showed exhaustion but also resolution. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "Part of me feels like I betrayed him, even though I know he betrayed himself first." "You saved this company," Blake reminded her. "Thousands of jobs, countless livelihoods, that matters." "It does," she acknowledged, "but so does he, despite everything." Blake hesitated, then asked the question that had been weighing on his mind. "Do you regret working with me on this? Would it have been easier if you'd never—" "Never what?" Olivia turned to face him. "Never met you, never trusted you, never kissed you." "Any of it," Blake said, suddenly uncertain in a way that was foreign to his nature. "All of it." Olivia reached up, her hand gentle against his cheek. "The only thing I regret is that we met under these circumstances. Everything else, working with you, trusting you, falling for you, I don't regret any of it." Blake pulled her closer, his arms encircling her waist. "And now? Where does this leave us?" "Complicated," Olivia admitted with a small smile. "I'm the interim CEO. You're a senior executive. The board will be watching us closely for any hint of impropriety." "I don't care," Blake said firmly. "We've proven we can work together effectively, maintain professional boundaries when necessary, and what we feel for each other is too important to ignore," Olivia finished for him. "I agree. but we'll need to navigate carefully, especially during the transition. Blake nodded, understanding her caution even as he chafed against it. I've never been good at patience. Neither have I, Olivia confessed, her eyes warming as she looked up at him. But some things are worth waiting for. In that moment, with Manhattan spread out beneath them and the uncertainty of the future ahead, Blake realized how profoundly Olivia had changed him. She had challenged his assumptions, tested his principles, and ultimately shown him that true success wasn't measured in acquisitions or power, but in the courage to stand for something greater than oneself. I told you once that I wanted your first time and every time after, Blake said softly, drawing her closer. I meant it then as a conquest, but now I mean it as a promise. Olivia's eyes widened slightly at the intensity in his voice. What are you saying, Blake? I'm saying that I love you, he replied, the words emerging with surprising ease for someone who had never spoken them romantically before. Not as a challenge or a prize, but as the remarkable woman you are. And I'm asking for the chance to prove that to you however long it takes. Tears shimmered in Olivia's eyes, but her smile was radiant. You already have, she whispered, rising on her toes to kiss him. As the sun set over Manhattan, casting golden light across the boardroom, where they stood embraced, Blake and Olivia faced an uncertain future. The company would need rebuilding, Richard's legacy would need reconciliation, and their relationship would face scrutiny and challenges. But in that moment, one truth was clear to them both. Some things were worth fighting for, worth sacrificing, worth risking everything to protect. Not power or wealth or corporate empires, but the rarer treasures, integrity, purpose, and the courage to choose love over fear. In finding each other, they had found themselves, the best versions of who they could be. And that beyond any merger or acquisition was the greatest success of all. 2 months later, as Olivia Woolcott officially accepted the permanent position of CEO at Woolcott Industries' shareholder meeting, Blake watched from the front row with pride and love evident in his expression. The company was emerging stronger from its crisis, with new ethical frameworks and transparent governance that had begun to restore investor confidence. Richard Woolcott, facing legal consequences but granted leniency due to health considerations and cooperation, had retreated to his Connecticut estate. The relationship between father and daughter remained strained but not severed, a wound slowly healing through cautious reconciliation efforts on both sides. As for Blake and Olivia, they had navigated the professional and personal challenges with determination and discretion. Their relationship, once kept carefully private during the transition, was now acknowledged openly, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared principles, and a love that had been forged in the crucible of crisis. When Olivia concluded her acceptance speech to thunderous applause, Blake was the first to rise to his feet. Their eyes met across the crowded auditorium, and in that wordless exchange was everything they had fought for, everything they had become together, and everything they still aspired to be. In that moment, they both knew. Some battles were worth fighting, not for power or position, but for the chance to become who you were meant to be. And some victories weren't measured in stock prices or corner offices, but in the courage to choose integrity over expedience and love over ambition. For Blake Chandler and Olivia Woolcott, that was the most valuable acquisition of all. Dear listeners, we hope you've been captivated by Blake and Olivia's journey through corporate intrigue and unexpected love. Their story reminds us that sometimes our greatest challenges reveal our true character and lead us to unexpected treasures. If you enjoyed this emotional roller coaster, we've prepared a special playlist with equally compelling stories that explore the complex intersection of ambition, integrity, and love. Find it by clicking to your left. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video. We bring you unique, character-driven stories every day that probe the depths of human